The Nissan Qashqai has got a lot to answer for, not least of which is right here before us. Two new hybrid models for the mid-sized family SUV crossover class, the Honda ZR-V and the Renault Austral. But with so much competition out there, what really is the best bet if you've got £40,000 to spend and want a practical, efficient, high-riding family car? Well, that is a good question, because you're not just talking about these two brand new models here. This is such a busy class and there are so many options. So we will be talking about what the best option is overall. But first of all, we're going to look at these two here. Now, they are both full hybrid cars. Now, Toyota might call that self-charging hybrid, but basically what it means is that you cannot plug these cars in, but you do get a little bit of electric running. So they'll run on electric power at lower speeds when you're parking, when you're pulling away from the traffic lights, and when you're coasting as well. So you can do, well, some might say up to about 50% of the time on electric power alone. Now, that's very similar tech to the Toyota RAV4, of course, which is another really big player in this class. And it's also very similar tech to that in the Hyundai Tucson and the Kia Sportage, which you can get with plug-in hybrid technology as well. And we would say that the Hyundai and Kia are currently our favourite cars in the class, so those are definitely the ones to beat. The Honda ZR-V is a little bit smaller than the CR-V that many will be more familiar with. It gets a 4-cylinder, 2-litre petrol engine and front-wheel drive for 181 brake horsepower, CO2 emissions of 132 grams per kilometre, economy of 48.7 mpg and prices from just under £40,000 up to 42.5 for the top-spec advanced model that we have here. The Renault Austral starts off at under £35,000, but the higher spec hybrid Alpine branded models that we have here and that most will want to go for, well, they start at £37,000 and goes up to £39,000 for the top spec version like our test car. All get the same 1.2 litre 3-cylinder petrol hybrid system, and if you go for the higher powered version, then you get an 80 brake horsepower electric motor that brings power up to 196 brake horsepower, while CO2 is under 110 grams per kilometre and economy is down to around 57 mpg. I'm going to talk a bit more about running costs and real-world economy a bit later, but I'm going to start with practicality because I think it's such a crucial aspect for these cars. It's why you go for a family SUV rather than a standard hatchback or something like that. So, the Renault Austral has got a 430-litre boot. Now, that's not too bad. That's actually bigger than you get in the Honda. But it's also smaller than you get in your Hyundai Tucson, Kia Sportage, Nissan Qashqai, so it's not great by class standards. And you can see it's kind of actually a bit narrow, I think, for this class, and the boot looks a bit high. However, it does have a really big advantage in that those seats actually slide forwards and backwards, so you can prioritise your luggage space or your rear passenger space, and you get up over 500 litres when those seats are forward. And it's also got some nifty tricks in that you can drop the seats from the back here, like that, which is quite good, and you've got a variable boot floor. Well, you haven't actually, you've just got a wheel well under there which you can get some stuff in, but that's not ideal, I suppose. Not bad, but definitely not the best in class. The rear seats in the Renault are spacious enough and you get a centre rear armrest and the seat backs recline. There's plenty of leg and headroom for 2 adults, but 3 across will be a squeeze. The Honda's got a 400-litre boot, which, to be honest, is a bit disappointing by the class standards. What I would say is that actually the boot floor itself is very similar size to the Renault, so I don't think it's floor space that's a huge problem. It's more to do with it's a fairly shallow boot, I think. So you've got this sort of raked back rear windscreen. Generally, again, I think it will be absolutely fine for most family motorists' needs, but it definitely could be a lot better. You do get a little bit of a cubby under there, but it's not very deep at all. And perhaps more disappointing is that there's no sliding seats or any of that sort of versatility that you get in the Renault. While the Honda's quite disappointing for boot space, it's good for rear passenger space, with plenty of leg and headroom, and, as with the Renault, there's plenty of light if you go for the top spec model that we have here, as it comes with a standard glass roof. I don't mind it up here. The interior of the ZR-V is pretty much straight from the Civic, which is no surprise because this is based on the Civic. It's ultimately an SUV version. And that's not a bad thing. It all feels pretty well put together. The materials are all quite nice. There's a lot of leather in this top spec car. I do have a few niggles. The wing mirrors are proportionately the biggest wing mirrors I have ever seen on a car. It looks like they're going to flap and make the car sort of take off. It's crazy. So great visibility backwards, but they actually do get in the way when you're at junctions and things. Another big niggle I have, this is, like I said, top spec car, and you don't get adjustable lumbar support on the seat, which I personally really value because I've got a bit of a creaky back. So longer journeys, I think it would really benefit from that. But the flip side of that is that it does have sort of two-way seat base adjustment, so you can lift underneath your knees as well as the back of the seat, which I really like, and lots of cars don't get that. Other than that, it's generally fine, but This infotainment system does really let things down. The graphics really look quite old-fashioned, and it's just not the easiest to find the setting that you're after, even though it's got some shortcut buttons here. So yeah, that's not great. It does get physical aircon buttons though, and I do like that. It does get wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto and sat-nav, but the Honda's screen really does feel a generation behind the system in the Renault as well as in the Kia and Hyundai. It definitely feels more modern and techy in here, I have to say, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your opinion. I can completely understand both. Certainly, the first thing you notice when you get in here is the huge screen here. At the moment, we've got the map showing as well, kind of wide screen behind here. So it really is, you've got all of your functions there. You've got Google inbuilt software as well. I'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, touchscreen much better than in the Honda. I think actually perceived quality is pretty much on a par with the Honda. It all feels nice and solid. I quite like in these Alpine trimmed ones, you get this nice sort of sporty upholstery and the contrasting blue stitching, little French flags. There's some really nice details around here. I also really like this sort of Alcantara finish up here. So it does feel pretty classy, and I think good value really as well for the price. So that's definitely in the Renault's favour. The built-in Google software in the Renault is some of the best out there. The graphics are just fabulous, and it's great that you've got all the benefits of Google Maps built right into the car. The voice control is good too, and you get all of the features that you want. And before I forget, you do get lumbar adjustment in the Austral, which is really good, but you don't get to tilt the seat base. So, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Of course, most importantly, you do get physical aircon controls. Praise be. So that is a win for the Renault in terms of its infotainment and practicality, so it is off to a really good start. How does it drive? Well, it's an interesting answer to that, because it's okay, I think, is the straightforward answer. So we're talking here about a 1.2 litre petrol engine with an 80 brake horsepower electric motor attached. It's quite a powerful motor. You can get it with less power. So this car that we've got here is the top spec 196 brake horsepower Alpine version, and you can get that same hybrid powertrain with a bit less power, so 160 horsepower. And it's very interesting because it's quite a complicated powertrain. So that gearbox particularly is an automatic gearbox, but it's a clutchless, it's got racing technology, technically sort of 7 speeds. Anyway, it's an automatic, but that's part of the reason why it just feels like this car never really kind of calms down. It's a very busy car. The powertrain, you feel it flicking between electric mode and petrol. The gearbox is kind of doing things and you're not quite sure what. And although none of that is terribly intrusive, you are kind of aware of the car just doing its thing in the background. The plus side is that it does spend a lot of time in electric power, so I think that is really good. And also it's got 4-wheel steer on this top spec car as standard, and that is great because it means the turning circle drops right down from nearly 12 metres down to nearly 10 metres, which is more like what you get with stuff like, you know, a Ford Fiesta or sort of a Super Mini. So it's really wieldy and great in car parks and that kind of thing. Really good for Renault to have that on here. But when you do get up to a bit more speed out on a good country road, that 4-wheel steer, it can feel a little bit unpredictable because the steering's quite quick. So as you turn into a corner, it can feel like the car's being more reactive than you expect it to be. But you do get used to that. I don't personally love the sort of slightly squared off steering wheel. I find that a bit odd too. So all in all, the Renault is actually quite entertaining in its own way. And like I said, it's really great that a 4-wheel steer really helps in car parks and stuff. So great in that respect. But there are others out there that are just a bit more intuitive and predictable, and to be honest, just a bit better to drive. Not only because the ride comfort on this car is particularly, well, I mean, if the powertrain's a bit busy, the ride comfort, it just never settles down, particularly over really high frequency bumps and things. It's just constantly making a noise, and you never sort of, it's just a bit too firm, to be honest, especially on the 20-inch wheels for this model. So yeah, it's fine, but it could be quite a lot better. There are definitely better cars out there. I would also say that as a small observation, so you put the car into reverse and drive up here on a stick next to the wheel, rather Mercedes-like, but you've also got your windscreen wipers on a stalk just below that, and you've got voice control and your volume for the radio just down here. So you've got 3 things on the side of the steering wheel, and it's very easy to wipe your windscreen rather than put it into reverse. As for real-world efficiency, the Renault managed 52 mpg over our varied test route. Not bad at all, and it's also worth mentioning that with the usefully lower CO2 emissions that it has over the Honda, benefit in kind tax will be usefully lower for employees on a company car scheme. Now, when it comes to the Honda, I think the benefits that it has over the Renault is primarily in terms of its refinement and ride comfort. Now, I'll start with refinement. In the Renault, that little 1.2 litre 3-cylinder, when it's cold particularly, sounds like a little tiny tractor engine out the front of the car. It's really sort of gruff and noisy when you first start the car. When it's warmed up, it's not too bad. But the Honda's a bit better than that. You still get a bit of a buzzy engine noise in the Honda, but it's much better than in the Renault, I have to say. Now, in terms of the ride comfort, well, the Honda still isn't brilliant itself either. It's still a bit lumpy, but it is definitely better over those kind of high frequency, really coarse surfaces. You don't get as much of a kind of constant fidget and it's definitely a bit comfier, I think, the Honda. So it does win on that front over the Renault. In terms of performance, it's a little bit faster as well. So you get 7.9 seconds to 62 in this, which is a 2-litre petrol engine, by the way, with an electric motor assisting it, and a sort of single-speed automatic transmission. And you do have these gear paddles here that sort of pretend to change gear, which I still think is a good idea because it feels like it gives you more control, and I quite like the paddle movement. That's absolutely fine. But having said that the Honda is a little bit quicker, it is absolutely not a car that you want to drive quickly. It does suddenly get quite harsh and noisy when you do get up to higher speeds. And you just feel quite removed, really, from the handling of the car. It's fine. You feel confident in it, and it goes exactly the direction you point it in, of course. But it's not that responsive. The steering's fairly slow, and it's weirdly heavy as well. So when you're steering the car, even around town and that kind of thing, and even if you've gone for your more normal mode or eco mode rather than sport, it's still really quite heavy steering. I don't mind it, but it does feel noticeably quite meaty compared to the Renault, which has got quite light, fast steering. So generally, I actually don't mind the way the Honda drives. I think it's very easy to get in and go. It's very smooth, and it just sort of does what you want it to. It feels very confident, and that's absolutely fine. That's confident and neutral and easy is what people want in this class, and the Honda does that. But it's not very inspiring either, and there are more comfortable options in the class too. In terms of towing, because I will say a lot of people probably want to tow with these cars too, where you can get a 1,500 kilogram towing limit, both in the Honda and in the Renault. The Honda managed 45 mpg in our real-world test and did spend a useful amount of time on electric running, but the CO2 emissions do mean that the Renault and plenty of plug-in hybrid rivals will be cheaper for company car users. Still, at least Honda has an excellent reputation for reliability, and both of these cars get 3-year warranties. So the question is, which of these two is best? Well, I think the win here definitely goes to the Renault because it's got better versatility inside, lower emissions. I also think it's slightly better value overall. So yeah, I would definitely go for the Renault out of these two. But I would say the message to take home from this is really that actually both of them are quite middling in this class. There are so many other options out there. And I would definitely go for the Hyundai Tucson or the Kia Sportage, which have a better range of engines and they feel a lot more modern and they're much more practical. Or do look at used options, because the Skoda Kodiaq and the Seat Ateca, for instance, they've been around for a while, but they've been favourites of ours for a long time, and they're a great buy if you go nearly new. So do check those out as well. And of course, you can do that on CarGurus.co.uk, where you will find a whole host of fantastic used family SUVs. And while we've got you, please do like the video, subscribe to the CarGurus UK YouTube channel, and turn your notifications on so that you don't miss any of our videos.